Today on The State of Us, 5 ways the 2024 election will make history. While it's not certain, it is definitely likely that 2024 could be a rematch between President Joe Biden and President Donald Trump. And there's 5 different ways that the 2024 election will break ground, or at least be very notable in terms of the combination of circumstances taking place. So today we're going to break those down. They're based on an opinion piece from the Wall Street Journal by Bill Galston. And we're going to take a look at that. So welcome to The State of Us. I'm your host, Justin T. Weller, joined today by the one and only, your friendly redneck liberal and the senior resident historian here at True Chat, Mr. Lance Jackson.
Well, today's show puts together 2 of my favorite topics, presidential elections and U.S. history. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started because there's 5 different things to talk about this upcoming election if it plays out like so many of the pundits are trying to tell us.
So first up is the obvious one, which is that a rematch would be only the second time in U.S. history, the last one was in 1892, that an incumbent president faced the man he defeated in the prior election. This rare circumstance will transform the race. Bill Galston contends that when incumbents face challengers who haven't served as president, the election is mainly a referendum on the president's performance. Voters first typically decide whether the incumbent has done well enough to merit re-election. If they decide he hasn't, then they must decide whether they're willing to entrust the Oval Office to his opponent. Even Ronald Reagan, during his 1980 race against the unpopular incumbent Jimmy Carter, had to reassure voters that he was a safe choice. But when a president faces a former president, which has only happened once before, each has a record to defend. And the election is a choice between comparable options. Each candidate's agenda for the future can be weighed against his past performance, and voters will view promises to accomplish more than what each candidate did over his previous 4-year term with skepticism.
Grover Cleveland v. Benjamin Harrison. So that was that election in 1892, and Grover Cleveland had been president for 4 years. Harrison the Republican, had won and replaced him, and then Cleveland wins again. And so the Democrat wins the election. So if we going to use that old adage, which I'm not sure I believe in, that history repeats itself, then Donald Trump will be victorious in the 2024 election because that's what happened. The older president, we got older meaning the first person who won the office lost to the second one, and then the first one won again. So it is an interesting scenario, though, when you look at it, that they both have had the office and both
for the same amount of time.
Right. And it's
when the election takes place.
Out there, it's out there as to what they did and how they behave and how they want to run things. So it's not necessarily when you listen to 2 new candidates and they're both promising what they're going to do. They both have track records.
Right.
And so I think that is a key difference in this election. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, like if you go back, you think about, when Obama was first running, right? That election, to your point, was between 2 candidates who had never been president because we had a president who was terming out. So that wasn't even, that's gone. That equation of, well, what have you done or you can talk about that some if you've been, Senate, Congress, et cetera, but it's not the same as if you've obviously already held the office of president. And most of the time when you have that, it's a president who's been in 4 years versus somebody who's not been in. So again, the choice as was explained here is mainly a referendum decision on whether or not, on whether or not you want the continuation of what was happening or whether you want something different. I think
except you're not getting different. You're getting what you've had before, which I think that's a key point because it's not different. You know what you had, with Trump And now you've seen what you have with Biden. So you have two things that you know what you're going to get. So if they do run against each other, neither one of them are going to change the way they run the office.
Yeah, I haven't heard either one of them promise.
They're not going to change their policies, right? They're not going to change the way they did business, right? The way they run the office. So I think that gives you, what do you want, right? And as we know, the country is really split.
Right.
And in the last election in 2020, we got a whole bunch of people out to vote.
Yeah.
Which is what I think just really threw Donald Trump into a tiz. How can I lose when I got more votes than I did last time? And he did, right? So we know that this race, I don't know, will it bring out people, or will people just throw up their hands and say it really doesn't matter? I mean, to me, it really matters, because I think so much what they want to do is different, is so diametrically opposed, as well as the way they do it. So, I mean, I do think there's a legitimate choice here, over who you want to lead your country, and what their leadership style is like, as well as what policies they will push.
Well, the other thing I wonder, from a history standpoint, right, and I don't know the answer to this, but so Grover Cleveland was 1884, and then he ran in 1888, but lost the popular vote lost the electoral college vote to Benjamin Harrison, and then in 1892 ran again and won.
Mm-hmm.
Did Harrison run in 84?
No.
And did he run in 92?
Yes.
Okay. So I guess the one key difference here in this whole, hodgepodge thing that's going on is that you have, like, for example, the first time that Cleveland was running, right? He wasn't running against Harrison, only the second time and the third time. In this case, though, you have, now they're both running against each other again. So I don't know. I guess it's interesting.
No, it was twice there, because they ran.
Yeah, that's true.
And interesting, both times, the Republican won because of the Electoral College.
Right. Yeah, well, they do point out that
Cleveland's the Democrat.
Yeah, Cleveland in all three
Republican.
presidential elections won the popular vote.
Right.
He just didn't win in 88 because he lost the Electoral College. And that's the other thing here, right, is it's not just about, we also talk about that, it's the electoral math that makes the difference here. We can talk about the national polls and the public sentiment, we can do all that, but really that's not what's going to decide how this
50 separate elections, right?
And Trump was elected president without winning the popular vote.
Right.
So, it not only is it possible, it happened. That is how he won previously.
Right.
So it would stand to reason that obviously he could win that way again,
If they're the candidates, it's going to be tight again. I think what's interesting is, what will the voter turnout be?
Yeah.
And the other question is, and that's not in there, it's not in today's thing for the show, and I was going to save it till later, but because we're kind of going on about this, I think number 6 in today's, because we had 5, and it's not historical, except if you go back to Abraham Lincoln and the Civil War, who's going to be the vice president?
Yeah. Well, we were talking about that before the show.
Right. It's not in the article, but that's the other one is, I really don't think, right, I guess anything's possible. Trump's not picking Pence.
No, I don't think, given that, well, I don't know. Maybe, there probably is a strategy argument there. Like, hey, if Pence would agree to it after another hard fought election and you can bring him on board, like, hey, this is somebody is not just gonna,
and Pence
do whatever the heck Trump wants.
The second Republican choice. He's not right now.
Right.
But if, Trump's by a landslide and Pence finishes second, it's like, hey, dude, come back on, right? That's kind of a move.
Wouldn't that be
that's kind of a move that Trump would make, right?
Oh, that would be something. Although, the one thing I would say that I don't think is likely there is Trump's not really known for his forgiveness, I would say. So I'd imagine that might be a challenging.
But he wants to win.
He does.
He does like to win.
That's does winning Trump forgiveness, or But who knows?
So what's the next historical point? Sorry, not to get us off track too much.
The next one is a second key difference between 2024 and a typical election is if Mr. Biden is the Democratic nominee, he will probably face a challenge unlike any Democratic incumbent since 1948, namely breakaway candidates from both his left and right. Harry Truman had to surmount challenges from both former Vice President Henry Wallace's Progressive Party and Senator Strom Thurmond's Dixiecrats. In 2024, Mr. Biden may contend with the Green Party's Cornel West, as well as a bipartisan centrist no labels ticket. Although Truman lost nearly 5% of the popular vote to breakaway candidacies, he nonetheless received nearly 50% of the popular vote and handily defeated Republican Thomas Dewey. But the political party is more balanced today than in 1948. Mr. Biden would be harder pressed than Truman to survive such a four-way race. He had to reunify the Democratic Party, which had splintered 4 years earlier during the bitter primary contest between Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders to beat Mr. Trump in 2020.
Well, and if you remember, if you had a decent American history teacher, maybe you remember the picture in your book. This is the election with Dewey and Truman. Truman holding up the Chicago Tribune with the big bold headline that says Dewey defeats Truman. So our author of the article kind of makes, Truman was able to overcome. It was a very close election because of the two breakaway Democratic candidates. That 5% doesn't sound like a lot, but when everybody went to bed on election night, they thought Dewey had won. And then the votes came in on the West Coast and Truman had eked out a victory. So that is an interesting, scenario that I'm sure a lot of people haven't thought about. So,
and how does Biden contend with that?
Right. How do you address that?
Yep.
Because you have your progressive wing of the Democratic Party,
yep,
who is very boisterous but not very large, and then you have the no labels possibility, right? Because we've had that show.
Yeah, possibility.
And they're just going to go in, they say, if they think they have a chance to win.
Right.
Which neither Henry Wallace or Strom Thurmond had a chance to win. They were just making political statements.
Yeah.
Which is like the Green Party can't win, right? No labels, I think the book is still out. So there's a little bit of difference there for me when you look at it that way.
The problem for Biden, right, being, and part of the reason that it would be interesting is, the folks on the left don't really have a chance, of overcoming you, but they could keep some of your Bernie AOC type voters from voting for you. Maybe they won't vote for the Green Party, but maybe again, that turnout component, maybe they just don't vote at all. Okay. Biden is about as vanilla, mainstream, traditional Democrat, I think, as you get in a lot of respects in terms of historically in the past, 4 decades, what do you think of when you think of a Democrat? Like there could be a picture of Joe Biden in the dictionary in terms of what you're looking at. He's not very novel in any particular kind of way. So, but the flip side of that then is that also means that the centrists don't have any particular loyalty to Biden either. So that's where, to your point though, a no labels type ticket could pull substantive support from him, because you're talking about, you can probably win the swing voters, but you may actually be able to eke away some of the traditional Democratic voters too, because you have a ticket that's close enough to them that they could be seen to split away if they're not happy with the record.
Well, here's a little thing about the Green Party though. Don't discount in a close election in a state how that little bit might make the difference, because in 1844, Henry Clay was the odds-on favorite to be elected president. And the Liberty Party in New York took 10,000 votes. And that 10,000 votes was enough to allow James K. Polk to become president over Henry Clay. So sometimes when you break it down state by state, if somebody like the Green Party has enough support in a certain state, they could take enough votes away that would allow Trump to win a state that nobody thought he had a chance for.
We're going to talk about Trump next. We talked some about Biden, kind of about the match between the two. What about what unique challenges is Trump facing? Keep it here on The State of Us. We'll be right back. first point we covered was the novelty of a rematch, the only second time in U.S. history that it happened. The last time was 1892 with our buddy Grover Cleveland. And the second key difference was talking about Biden specifically and this unusual set of circumstances where he may be facing challenges from the left and the center, which is difficult for a candidate who sort of presented himself, especially in the last election, as being, maybe more of a centrist deal broker type individual. Because now, well, you can't tack to the left because there's people on the left that already know you're not a leftist. And you can't really do a lot of appeal to the center because you got somebody else who's appealing to that. So you're stuck in this sort of position that's difficult to break out of. So what is the third? Well, third, we turn to Donald Trump. He's facing his own unique set of unprecedented legal challenges, multiple criminal indictments that could have him shuttling back and forth between court and appearances and campaign events. Massive legal fees are draining funds from his campaign coffers, and this burden is unlikely to decrease between now and the 2024 election. So far, his legal troubles have broadened and intensified his support with the Republican base, but it's hard to predict what effect they will have on the swing voters who will determine the outcome of the general election. We're always quick to say, oh, look, so-and-so's supporters are sticking by him, right? And I mean, that could be with any politician. But really, it's not so much about their supporters. I mean, yeah, if their supporters are fleeing, that's definitely a concern. But it's not unusual, especially in today's landscape, for them to, come hell or high water, we're here with our guy no matter what. What you're more interested in are the people that, for example, in 2016 voted for Trump and then switched to Biden in 2020. Those voters are the ones that you're paying attention to.
Right. Trump's going to get his 35 to 42%, his hardcore supporters.
Right.
No matter what happens to him,
Yeah.
If he gets thrown into jail, which, not going to happen, but if he were, they're still going to vote for him, right? They're the, like you said, the hardcore supporters. And as we've always said on the show, whether it's Trump and Biden, no matter who it is in a presidential election, each side is going to get 40% of the vote. You're going after the 20% undecided, independents, whatever you want to call them. And you need to win 11% of those, right? And that's
right.
How you get to be president, because,
or at least today, that's how
in today's politics, nobody's getting less than 40% of the vote. So, it will be interesting though, because I don't know, the other way I was thinking about it when you were reading about, it's draining the campaign, money away with all the legal fees. Is it sort of free advertising? I mean, his name's in the paper, his pictures plastered all over the news every night talking about his troubles in New York or Georgia or wherever else they might come from. So yes, you're spending lots of money on legal fees, but my point is he's getting his name out in front of the American public on a daily basis in multiple medias. Whereas I can go a day or two without hearing anything about President Biden.
And he's the sitting president.
And he is the president, right? I mean, and I think some of that's strategic, but let's just face it. If you're looking for who doesn't know the names, but the legal fees aside, you could say that, and maybe that's Trump's plan.
Well, on the other,
I'm spending all this money on legal fees,
right.
But hey, I'm not having to pay, for advertising. Plus, it's a great thing to go to your base and say, hey, I need more money so that, we can fight the good fight and win in 24.
Yep.
I mean, I'm sure they're already doing that, but
well, in a lot of ways,
I'm not getting
does Trump's campaign is the strategy internally. I mean, I'm not talking about externally being forced into it, but internally deciding the campaign is about the case. And I think that'd be an interesting strategy because in some ways it becomes, then it doesn't matter who you're running against. You know what I mean? It could be Joe, it could be no labels, doesn't matter. This is all about me being wrongfully attacked, power being usurped, and the entire strategy is, I don't care who the opposition is. This is about fighting this fight and winning on principle.
Well, doesn't that sound Trump? It's all about me. That's what you're saying. That sounds like that's right up Donald Trump's alley.
Well,
because everything is all about Donald Trump.
If I'm the campaign manager, and my job is to get my candidate to win, well, what do I want to do? I want to play on strengths, right? And I want to remove as much comparison as possible. Don't make it about me versus. It's just about me. It's just about what I'm offering. And it's not that undifferent than, like if we look back at a more recent, successful presidential campaign, like when Obama first ran for president, very little about the campaign had to do with the opposition. It had to do with, well, what am I suggesting take place?
The four-letter word hope. It was all about hope.
It was all about that. And while obviously what Donald Trump is selling is probably not hope, it's the same idea of I'm selling a singular thing here, which is that if I focus exclusively on this, as they just said, the trials are going to, this stuff's going to take up all of 2024 anyway. Great, let it, That means that means all the questions I'm getting are about this. Everything that I'm doing, it's all about this. So I don't have to worry about.
Nobody's asking me what my policies are, or what I'm going to do, how,
nope,
how I'm going to stop the war in Ukraine.
Everybody's focused on this.
Right.
So, there is that side of I could see a campaign strategy being just embrace it, embrace it and hold the line and talk about how right you are and fight in the fight. And there is definitely a strategy direction there. So that's the other component.
That's the third one. So what's next?
The fourth, and this is the one that I'm really wanting to talk about because I think you brought it up earlier. It's kind of, in my mind, it's a two-part thing. The part that's brought up is that when the general election campaign begins next summer, Mr. Biden will be 81 and Mr. Trump 78. Already in 2020, they were the oldest nominees ever. While polls suggest that Mr. Biden's age is seen as more of a problem than Mr. Trump's, the actuarial tables indicate that each man is at heightened risk for a serious health event that could transform the contest and even force his party to select an alternative presidential candidate. After the 1972 Democratic Convention, the revelation of vice presidential nominee Thomas Eagleston's past episodes of depression forced George McGovern, the party's nominee for president, to replace his running mate. Selecting a new presidential nominee on short notice would be far more difficult and consequential, but the odds of such an event next year are higher than in any previous election cycle in U.S. history. The component this brings up is twofold, right? One is the age component, which is it's novel in that they were already the oldest the last time we had this matchup. So they'll still be, now they'll be even older, right? They didn't get younger.
In fairness, Trump seems more full of more vitality.
Sure.
And more life right now than Biden does.
Well, I think that 3-year difference, in this case, it does matter. And there's an appearance component. I think Biden has embraced more of the grandpa sort of image, and Trump's never really, that's not been his, and isn't it crazy that when you're talking about a presidential campaign that the style of candidates matters, but it does. It does. If you stand them next to each other, people are probably going to put more than a 3-year gap between the two of them, I would, if I didn't know the ages and I was just looking at them, it's not like I'd think that Trump's a young man.
Spray tan make a big difference to you?
But for all that people make fun of it, the hair color and the spray tan.
But you see Trump out on the golf course. You see him walking into court. You see, what's the picture of Biden? Falling down the steps.
Yeah.
The image, whether it's true or not,
right? The
image, there's a big contrast.
Yep.
In the image of the physical well-being.
Well, Biden's got the age spots and the white hair and just he doesn't look as stable when he's moving around, all of which contributes to that notion of it being a problem, something to contend with.
Did you hear what Nikki Haley had to say about anybody running for political office? That they ought to take some kind of, and she is running as a Republican. She had, all of us should be open to a mental cognitive test.
Yes.
Very basic.
Yeah.
Because she didn't want to come out and bash Trump, but she's attacking that age issue of both of them and saying
a certain degree of faculty should probably be expected.
What's wrong with, don't we expect that out of our leaders to be?
Do we want a president that can't remember what they had for breakfast?
Right.
Because you might say, like, is that a big deal if me or Lance doesn't know? No, probably not. But the president's being asked on a daily basis is having huge amounts of briefing content thrown at them.
At least we hope so. Right.
Right. Historically, we assume that the president, I don't know if recently either of the last two presidents were digesting a lot of the information, but then doesn't that speak to how unhappy the American electorate have been while Biden and Trump have been president? I mean, doesn't that tell you part of what you need to know right there? I think Biden, again, total speculation here. I don't know. So, but it would not surprise me to find out that Biden is not reading his full briefing book every day and asking people to tell him some of what's in it, because it's just not, from a stamina standpoint, it's just not realistic to spend that time doing it. And we know that Trump, I mean, the information's out there that he just didn't read it because he didn't want to.
Maybe you haven't, but if you've been around people who are in their late 70s and early 80s for any amount of time, nothing against them, because I'm approaching that. But I mean, another decade or so, but
I was going to say,
you still, but if you spend any time, you spend any time with them, they're not able to do, right? Grandma can't bake cookies as quickly as she used to if she's in her late 70s or early 80s. Grandma may still be walking, but grandma's not leading you by the hand walking anymore. I mean, it's just the normal aging process.
Yeah.
And I think people don't want to stop and think about that when they think about their elected leaders, right? I mean, and we're doing this show with, Mitch McConnell and Dianne Feinstein, two senators, one from the Democrats, one from the Republicans, having to be told, they're McConnell stopping in mid-sentence and can't talk, and Feinstein's aides being seen whispering in her ear, "This is how you want to vote, Mrs. Senator." There is some diminished capacity as you start to reach your late 70s and early 80s, and we've all seen it with our loved ones. So why would we think these people who are running for political office are any different? If they're not able to run things, who actually is? If they're in name only, who is actually running things?
Well, that's part of who is the election actually about? Is it about the person at the front of the ticket, or as we talked about kind of prior to the show, the vice presidential nominee should be.
See, but I'll say it even further, because I don't think Kamala Harris is anywhere close to Joe Biden right now.
No.
So if Biden's not making the decisions, who is?
Right.
Who is reading the briefing books? Who is telling him what he needs to do and what he needs to say? Who is running the country?
Keep it here on The State of Us. We'll be right back. Who is running the country? Well, we supposedly as a country elected Joe Biden to be the president. But this question of age and the historic nature of it in the 2024 campaign does raise that serious question of, I guess, part of what I'm urging people to ask is, when they're not making the decision, who is, right? And I mean, that's part of what Lance is asking too, of the president can't make every decision, right? It doesn't matter how virile they are and how spry and how great everything's going. All of that is a moot point when you consider the job. The president has to delegate. There have to be people that can take action on the president's behalf. That is how the presidency has operated for, the last, 100 plus, years. That is the way it has to be. That said, when you have somebody like Biden and you have those questions of faculties and just the sheer.
But historically, it hasn't been the vice president.
Right.
Let's get that straight.
Well,
too.
Yeah, no,
everybody thinks, well, the vice president's second and the vice president's right
really
there.
The chief of staff
making decisions, right?
Typically going to be more.
The modern day vice president doesn't have any say so in the daily goings on of the government.
Yeah.
They go attend funerals and weddings and, run those kind of interference.
Well, they have their own chief of staff and their own.
And do their own thing. But, but it's usually not meeting with the president.
Right.
I mean, there have been vice presidents that never met with the president once the election was over.
Yeah. Yep.
So
they were cordoned off in their way.
Did their own thing.
Yep. It's the
That's my
most
question.
important, least consequential job
right.
in the world.
You're the lady in waiting.
Mm-hmm.
You are
Yep.
you are the first runner up.
Yep.
So to speak.
You're a heartbeat away, and in the interim, you can't do anything.
Right.
But to that point, because of their age and because of what statistics tell us, two important considerations that I think you need to be looking at as a voter is who is on their team who's likely to become staff. How comfortable are you with those people advising and helping this person or making decisions for them? We don't like to say that, but how comfortable are you with the people around them that are going to be staffers? And then the other question of, if one of these guys keels over or is unable to execute their duties any longer while in office, the vice president's going to assume the office. So it can't be one of those where, this person's probably not ever going to be president. There is that real component of the vice president theoretically always could become president, but most of the time,
the likelihood is going to be greatly increased in this election.
Exactly.
Right.
We know going into it that the people serving as vice president have a much higher chance of acting as president of the United States at some point than the typical vice president does, statistically speaking. So therefore, that's something that everybody should be keeping in mind is, do you like the person on the back half of the ticket? Would you be okay with them taking charge?
I think it's a very more so than in most presidential elections.
Because if you're
that's
not,
going to be a thought people have to have.
That needs to be something that you're talking about. No, I'm not okay with that person, because then that might change your mind about the top of the ticket too. Well, I don't know, if I don't know if they can see it through, then what happens, if I'm not okay with who takes over, then maybe I'm not okay with that ticket.
And it's not unprecedented for a president to choose a different running mate for his second term.
That's right.
So
it can happen.
Just throw that out there. Okay, what's the fifth one? So we can
The fifth one.
Make sure we give the audience their full taste of history today.
We are living in an era of unprecedented close presidential elections. In the 17 races between 1920 and 1984, the winner prevailed in the popular vote by 10 points or more on 10 separate occasions. Okay. And by 20 points or more in 5 instances. In the 9 elections since, no winner has come close to a 10-point margin of victory. And on 2 occasions, the candidate with a plurality of the popular vote lost the Electoral College. During this period, the number of truly contested swing states declined sharply to only 8 by 2020. A shift of 43,000 votes in Wisconsin, Georgia, and Arizona, states Mr. Biden carried by wafer-thin margins, would have yielded a tie in the Electoral College, throwing the election to the House for the first time since the 1824 election. Public opinion surveys thus far are pointing to yet another close contest whose outcome will be determined by narrow margins in the same states that became the sites of post-election legal struggles 4 years ago.
So now it poses the question, why do I vote? I live in a state that's already going to go one way or the other. Why do I bother to go vote?
It's a good question.
See, I know it's a different show. Sorry.
But this one raises the...
But it is going to come down to 6 to 8 states. And we're all going to be watching those results.
And the fact that it's that close, as is pointed out here, it's possible that nobody gets what's necessary.
Well, as a historian, I'm looking forward to that. That would be so fun. But
it would be something. I think it would be an excellent history lesson for the country. Because I'm not sure that if you ask the average American, well, one, if you ask them how we choose the president, I'm not sure that they would necessarily tell you that the Electoral College does it. And if they did, I'm not sure they could tell you how that works. But if they knew all that, could they tell you, well, what happens if nobody gets 270? Well, what do you mean? Doesn't somebody have to?
And
nope.
The ones who say, well, it would go to the House of Representatives don't realize that not every member of the House gets a vote. That it's 50 votes.
Right.
The state has to agree.
Yeah, the states vote on who becomes
not
president.
Every member of the House.
No. So,
and you know what? So now do we start looking at the makeup of the state representatives?
Yep. Well, because could say,
because
well,
you could
look at the map and, well, this state's red or this state's blue. Well, that doesn't mean that's how they're going to vote.
Right.
Because, there are states, Ohio's a good example, where our representatives in Congress are not representative of the state's population. In terms of political leanings, we're like 75-25 Republican, Democrat respectively, but the state's closer to like 45-55. So that's a substantial difference. You know what I mean?
But you'll check it off if it goes to the House, Ohio would be
right.
Would be the Republican.
But I'm saying Ohio's not the only state that's like that, right?
No, which is why you look at it, because
you don't want to just assume that your state's going to go a certain way. So
how educated of a voter do you have to be? We've already today asked you. You're going to take a look at the vice presidential candidates. You're going to have to take a look now at the makeup of the 50 states in the House in case it doesn't, So what would it doesn't have to, I'm sure
look at the congressional delegations from each state.
We'll do that for you. It won't be, it's not going to be that.
We're not going to ask them to do that.
No, we won't make you do that. But all of a sudden then, do you go vote, right? And then you've got what I threw out there is if you live in one of those states where the election is already decided, do you even bother to go vote?
Well,
the popular vote doesn't matter. And I know I throw that out there. We've done shows, go back folks, we've done shows talking about changing the voting system because this is one of those elections where if you don't live in one of those, let's say 10 states, your state's already decided it's not going to make any difference that this candidate's going to win. What's your incentive to go vote?
We've done how many shows on the Electoral College? People, you should go listen to that. There was a really good book that we did that talked about how the Electoral College actually disenfranchises conservative voters more than liberal voters. And there's a great piece on why that is. But it is that whole idea of if I live in North Dakota, why go vote? If I'm the
outcome's already decided,
right? If I'm a liberal,
no matter who they run
in North Dakota or a conservative in California, like that goes back to that whole. It's not just disenfranchising, the opposite party of a state. It actually disenfranchises the sitting party of the state too, because what's the motivation? So why we have the show today, Lance? There was a reason.
Oh well, because the place we work, True Chat, has a mission. And that mission is to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. And we've had fun talking about politics and especially presidential politics and history today. Hopefully you've enjoyed today's show. You learned something. And as you talk to your family and friends, they say, well, that sounds like something I could listen to every once in a while. Well, tell them. As a podcast, they can find us on Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, Apple Podcast, and everywhere podcasts are found.
The State of Us releases new episodes every Tuesday and Thursday, first thing in the morning. And those same episodes are heard on the weekends on AM and FM radio stations across the United States and parts of Canada. For The State of Us, I'm Justin T. Weller.
I'm Lance Jackson.
Special thanks to producer Bradley Butch, and thank you all, our audience, for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Be the change. Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. thestateofus.org.